before the sand, before the blade. Before the roar of the arena, there was silence. The silence of the Roman woman, excluded from politics, barred from office, her name rarely written in stone. And yet, in the shadows of empire, some women found ways to defy the silence. They would not sit, they would not sew, they would fight. But to understand those few who would one day step into the arena, we must begin with the world they came from. This is the story of Roman womanhood, of duty, of dignity, of oppression, and of the subtle, stubborn paths to power. The Roman world was ruled by men, in name, in law, in legacy. Women were expected to be modest, obedient, and invisible in politics. The ideal was Lucretia, the virtuous Roman matron raped by a king's son. And so ashamed, she took her own life. Her death sparked the Roman Republic. Her memory defined Roman virtue. To be a Roman woman was to be defined by others, by her father while unmarried, by her husband once wed, by her sons in old age. This was patria potestas, the power of the male head of household. Even noble women like Livia Drusilla, wife of Augustus, had to move behind the curtain, influencing, never commanding. A Roman woman could not vote, could not hold public office, could not serve in the military. And yet, behind the veil of submission, some maneuvered with skill. A Roman girl was often married in her early teens, sometimes as young as 12. Her husband might be twice her age. The match was rarely for love. It was for dynasty, dowry, and political alliance. Marriage was a contract, but also a transformation. In early Rome, a bride left her father's household completely, transferred into the legal authority of her husband. Later, under manus-free marriage, women remained under their father's legal authority, giving them more independence. Still, the expectation was clear. A woman's role was to bear children, preferably sons. Large families were idealized. Childbirth, however, was dangerous and a leading cause of death for Roman women. Those who had many children were honored with titles like univira, woman of one husband, and matrona, mother. But what of those who wanted more? While barred from politics, some women found power in religion. The most famous example, the Vestal Virgins. Chosen between ages 6 and 10, they served the goddess Vesta, guardian of the hearth. They lived in the house of the Vestals near the Forum. They maintained the sacred fire. They were symbols of purity, untouched by man, untouched by scandal. But they held real power, would own property, had bodyguards, would free condemned prisoners with a single word, sat with senators at public events. Their vow of chastity lasted 30 years. Breaking it meant being buried alive. Outside the Vestals, many women served in cultic roles, priestesses of Isis, Cybele, and Dionysus, organizers of household and local rituals, funders of temples. Religion was a space where women could move carefully in public. Not all Roman women were noble. In fact, the vast majority were poor, enslaved, or laboring. Some were street vendors, seamstresses, bakers. Others were midwives, nurses, wet nurses. Some ran taverns, worked in markets, even owned small businesses. Inscriptions tell us of women who sold perfumes, operated laundries, managed estates. Slaves, both male and female, filled every role imaginable. Domestic service, agriculture, education, gladiatorial training. Some female slaves were trained as entertainers, musicians, or even fighters. The earliest potential roots of the Gladiatrix, a freedwoman, if manumitted, could become a citizen, though never with full male rights. Still, some rose to wealth. Some even became patronae, female patrons of businesses and temples. These women, though often erased, were Rome's lifeblood. The further up the social ladder one climbed, the less visible and more powerful women became. Take Livia, wife of Augustus. She advised her husband, managed vast estates, shaped imperial succession, was deified after death. Or Agrippina, the younger, mother of Nero, used her marriage to Claudius to elevate her son. Appeared on coins, rare for a woman. May have ruled alongside Nero early in his reign. Or Julia Domna, wife of Septimius Severus, a philosopher empress, hosted scholars, corresponded with governors. called Mater Castorum, mother of the camp. These women could not rule directly, but their influence was real and dangerous. Many were poisoned, exiled, or erased. In Rome, gender was not just a social category, it was a code of honor. For a woman to be modest, silent, clothed, was to be Roman. For a woman to be naked, public, violent, was to be something else. That's why female gladiators were so shocking. Shattered every boundary. They fought in the open. They wielded weapons. Their bodies were displayed, armored but exposed. They became spectacles, both sexualized and feared. Some Romans found it thrilling. Others found it repulsive. The satirist Juvenal sneered at noble women training with wooden swords. He mocked their sweat, their calloused hands, their desire to mimic men. But the very fact he mentioned them means they were real. By the imperial period, Roman women had more freedom than in the Republic, but still faced limits. They could own and inherit property, divorce their husbands, run businesses. They could not. Serve in the army, vote, become magistrates, sign major contracts without a male guardian, though this too was often bypassed. Laws like the Lex Oppia, limiting women's use of luxury, were deeply controversial. Women protested in the streets, demanding repeal. The Senate debated the power of female desire, the decay of masculine virtue, the fear of social inversion. Into this storm stepped the Gladiatrix. So what kind of woman became a female gladiator? A slave, a criminal, a volunteer, a rebel, a performer? We don't fully know, but we know this. By stepping into the Ludus, the gladiator school, a woman broke every Roman rule. She rejected domesticity. She embraced violence. She became a creature of spectacle. Some fought in private shows, others in public games. Some were eroticized, some were cheered, all were remembered, too faintly. Because Rome, patriarchal, controlling, obsessed with image, worked hard to erase them. In the next chapter, we descend into that world, into the arena itself, to understand why gladiatorial combat captivated the Roman soul, and why women, too, found their place within it. The arena was not a sport, it was not entertainment, it was religion. In ancient Rome, violence was ritual, a public sacrifice, a theater of life and death, and at the center of it all stood the gladiator. Man or woman, slave or free, the gladiator was both tool and symbol, weapon and mirror. To understand the female gladiator, we must first understand the machine she entered. This is the culture of the Roman games. Blood, sand, glory, and silence. After the kill, the gladiatorial games began with death, not celebration. As early as the 3rd century BCE, aristocratic Romans held munera, funerary games to honor the dead with blood sacrifice. 2 men fought in front of a tomb. Their blood appeased the spirit. Their suffering pleased the gods. What began as ritual soon became spectacle. At the time of the late Republic, gladiatorial games had become public festivals. Politicians hosted them to gain favor. Emperors hosted them to show power. The Colosseum, completed under Titus in 80 CE, could hold over 50,000 people. Here, blood was poured like wine. Men fought beasts, criminals, each other. Crowds roared for mercy or for death. Games could last for weeks. Thousands could die. Every death was staged, timed, symbolic. Not all gladiators were slaves. Some were prisoners of war, condemned criminals, rebellious slaves, but many were volunteers, octorati, free men who sold themselves to the arena. Why? For money, glory, fame. Some were poor, some were desperate, some were addicted to the roar. They trained in ludi, gladiator schools. They took oaths of obedience, endurance, death, became property, but also legends. And sometimes they were women. The games were not just entertainment. They were a mirror of Roman ideology. Power through violence, order through fear. Civilization over savagery, discipline over chaos. To be a Roman was to control death, not fear it. In the arena, the emperor was godlike. He could spare or kill with a thumb's gesture. To fight in the arena was to act out Rome's very soul. Each gladiator type was like a chess piece, matched for balance, for drama, or mellow. heavy with large shield and sword. Threx, curved blade, griffin-crested helmet, Retiarius, net, and trident. Minimal armor. Secutor round shield, designed to hunt the Retiarius. Hoplomachus, spear and small shield. Bestiarius, fought wild animals. Female gladiators may have mirrored these roles, but often as exotic displays or novelty combatants. They sometimes fought each other, sometimes beasts, sometimes nude. A deliberate assault on Roman gender norms. But regardless of gear, they were trained killers. A gladiatorial fight was choreographed chaos. Combatants entered with a salute. Ave, Imperator, Moritori, te salutant. Hail, Emperor, we who are about to die salute you. Then came the clash, the beat of drums, the rhythm of blades, the rising cry of the crowd. Victory meant fame. Defeat did not always mean death. If a gladiator fought bravely, the crowd might chant for mercy, it spare him. But if he disappointed, they shouted, Ugula, kill him. The emperor gave the final signal. The loser knelt. Victor approached. A stab to the throat. Swift, efficient. The body was dragged off by slaves. Sand covered the blood, and the show went on. So why include women in this brutal ritual? Partly curiosity. Female gladiators were exotic, erotic, and transgressive. Roman authors described them with a mix of titillation and disgust. Juvenal mocked noble women who trained like gladiators. Cassius Dio recorded fights between women at public festivals. Suetonius noted that even Emperor Domitian had women fight by torchlight in private evening spectacles. But these were not merely sideshows. Their presence raised disturbing questions. What did it mean for a woman to fight, to bleed, to kill? What was she rejecting? What was she embodying? To see a woman wield a sword was to see Rome itself inverted. Gender, class, virtue, power, all appended. And yet, they kept coming. In 200 CE, Emperor Septimius Severus issued a ban on female participation in gladiatorial combat. He saw it as decadent, destabilizing, un-Roman. But the edict came too late to erase the memory. Statues, graffiti, and epitaphs had already been carved. One reads, "Here lies Amazonia, who fought with honor." Another names a pair of women, Achillea and Amazon. Two female gladiators who fought with such skill that they were granted a missio, a rare release from combat. The fact that such records exist in stone means these women were not fantasy. They were warriors, real, trained, applauded, and feared. The crowd was not passive. It was part of the ritual. They watched, judged, roared. Their eyes made you immortal or erased. For a female gladiator, the stakes were doubled. To enter the arena was to lose modesty, shed the toga, and with it Roman femininity. But if she fought well, she might earn something even rarer. Fame. Some gained fans, lovers, followers. Their names were whispered. Their likeness painted on walls. Few may have even bought their freedom. Why did Rome need such violence? Because Rome itself was violence. Its empire was built on slaughter, enslavement, conquest. Its laws preserved hierarchy, order, and bloodline. The games were a release valve for anger, lust, fear, and guilt. In the Colosseum, the people saw the world in miniature. The barbarian tamed. The criminal punished. The hero exalted. The emperor divine. The presence of female gladiators disrupted this story. They were an anomaly, a myth, a threat, and a reminder that Rome could not control everything. Not even gender, not even spectacle. In the arena, nothing was sacred. Not the body, not the law, not tradition. And in that space, a few women, poor, nameless, powerful, stepped out of history's shadows. We've heard the legends. We've seen the dramatizations. But in a world where history is written by the powerful, what remains of those who fought outside the script? Did female gladiators truly exist, not as myth, not as metaphor, but as flesh and blood? As women who fought, bled, and stood beneath the sun in the Roman arena? In this chapter, we follow the trail of evidence. Sparse, fragmentary, scattered across centuries, but real. And in those fragments they speak. Why don't we know more? Because the Roman Empire, while obsessed with gladiators, was not obsessed with preserving truth. Much of what we know comes from literary satire, imperial propaganda, damaged inscriptions, epitaphs, and graffiti, and a few rare archaeological finds. And female gladiators were anomalies. They weren't honored like male champions. They weren't part of the official tradition. They were rare, provocative, and often erased. But not entirely. Let's begin with the most famous image. In the British Museum lies a stone relief, dated to the 1st or 2nd century CE. It was discovered in Halicarnassus, in modern-day Turkey. It shows two armed women, mid-combat. They are labeled Amazon and Achillea. Both wear short tunics, arm guards, and helmets. They carry swords and shields. They fight like gladiators. Not mythic Amazons, but real athletes. Below the image is a single Latin word, mise, meaning dismissed or released. This tells us that both fighters fought bravely enough to be spared. A mark of respect. The relief is not satire. It is official, carved in stone, placed in public. This is our most concrete visual proof. Two real women, likely slaves or lower-class volunteers, recognized for their courage in the arena. The Halicarnassus relief stands alone visually. But Roman writers left behind fragments as well. Suetonius, Life of Domitian, he gave frequent gladiatorial shows, and also had women fight by torchlight. This brief line tells us that Emperor Domitian hosted female gladiator events, not in the Colosseum, but at night, under artificial lights. Why? Because they were considered taboo, even decadent. Darkness hid what daylight might shame. Cassius Dio, Roman history, even women fought in the arena, but only rarely. Here, Cassius Dio, a Roman senator, confirms their occasional presence, likely under imperial sponsorship. Juvenile satire vi. Juvenile ridicules noblewomen who abandon weaving for the sword. What modesty can you expect in a woman who wears a helmet, abjures her sex, and delights in the clash of arms? His tone is disgusted. But his sarcasm is based on something real. Women, particularly upper-class women, were training as gladiators. Whether they fought publicly or in private exhibitions is debated, but the practice existed. Roman gravestones speak louder than emperors, and in several rare cases, they mention female fighters. Gladiatrix in Ostia, an inscription from Ostia, Rome's ancient port city, refers to a woman who fought as a gladiator, though the exact wording has been partially eroded. The term used is Gladiatrix, a rare but grammatically correct feminine form of gladiator. Noricum, a theatrical ban. In the 2nd century CE, an inscription from Noricum includes a municipal law banning gladiatorial performances that include women. This ban implies they had been occurring often enough to merit legislation, suggests that female participation was not freakish, but trending. Latin rarely uses the word gladiatrix. In fact, it's only attested a few times. Why? Because Romans often preferred gender-neutral or masculine titles, even for women. Also, women were often identified by their roles in relation to men. Wife of, mother of, daughter of. A woman as fighter disrupted that structure. But today, historians accept gladiatrix as a valid descriptor. Just as we use imperatrix or senatrix, the term may have been rare, but the reality it describes was not fiction. Did women train in the same facilities as men? They don't have surviving rosters of gladiator schools. But we do have skeletons found near known Ludi, showing female physiology and signs of trauma. Artifacts including female-shaped helmets and greaves, and comparative inscriptions suggesting women underwent similar training routines. They likely lived apart, possibly in smaller training cells. Their regimen: strict. Their instructors: brutal. One theory suggests wealthy women paid to be trained for private events. Another posits punishment. Noble women condemned to gladiatorial service as public humiliation. Either way, they trained. They fought. They were not mere decoration. Beyond Halicarnassus, other depictions hint at female fighters. Mosaics showing short-haired figures with feminine builds in combat. Graffiti in Pompeii referencing female names tied to shows. Clay figurines with light armor and exposed breasts, interpreted as eroticized gladiators. Critics argue these could be mythological representations, Amazons perhaps. But in context, are in focused settings, paired combat poses, they strongly imply real performance. In 200 CE, Emperor Septimius Severus banned women from performing in the arena. Why? Because their participation had become too popular, too controversial, too subversive. The edict itself is proof that female gladiators had moved from novelty to norm. They were becoming visible. And Rome, obsessed with hierarchy, decorum, and tradition, reacted swiftly. What had once been tolerable became intolerable. Some still doubt their existence, they point to. Lack of full biographies, satirical tones and literary accounts. Ambiguity in inscriptions, but the convergence of evidence, visual, written, legal, forms a consistent picture. Major historians, including Alison Futrell, Kathleen Coleman, Shelley Haley, agree. Female gladiators were real, rare, marginal, erased, but real. Their legacy was buried, not lost. What remains of the Gladiatrix? A name, a helmet, a word in stone, a scratched image on plaster, a band passed in fear, and the echo of sand under bare feet. As a woman steps into the sun, sword in hand. She was not a symbol. She was not a myth. She was there. In the next chapter, we'll enter her world fully. We follow her into the Ludus, into the practice yard, the arena, the private fights, and the public shame. We trace her scars, physical and cultural, because to train as a gladiatrix was to unmake what it meant to be Roman. Before the roar of the crowd, before the scream of steel on bone, there was only the Ludus, the gladiator school, a prison, a training ground, a crucible. For the Gladiatrix, it was worse than hell and better than life, because inside these walls, she could become more than a possession. She could become a weapon. She may have arrived in chains, a war captive, a condemned criminal, a rebellious slave. Or she may have come willingly, a free woman who signed a contract to fight. But the moment she stepped through the gates of the Ludus, she ceased to be a woman. She became property. Every gladiator swore the same oath. I will endure to be burned, to be bound, to be beaten, and to be killed by the sword. It was not metaphor. It was not theater. It was submission to death. She was now a service penne, a slave of punishment. But she was also a student of war. The body was not hers anymore. She awoke before dawn. She ran laps under weight. She trained for hours with a rudis, a heavy wooden sword. She ate, drank, bled, and vomited in the heat. Her muscles thickened. Her hands blistered. Her voice deepened from shouting. She built calluses where other women wore jewelry. She stank of sweat and bruises. The female body, once shrouded in Roman modesty, was now exposed, stripped, and remade. The diet was dense and plain, high in barley, beans, and carbohydrates. They were called horderi, barley eaters. The goal was mass, bulk, fat, enough to absorb a shallow cut and survive. She drank a vinegar-based drink called pasca, the sour fuel of Rome's legions. There was no wine, no spice, only fuel and fists. Every Ludus was ruled by a lanista, a brutal trainer and businessman. To him, she was an investment, commodity, a potential profit. If she died in training, she was wasted coin. If she survived, she could fill the seats. He taught her to kill, to show pain in a way that pleased the crowd, to move with style, dramatic but efficient. He insulted her, beat her, perhaps worse. But if she fought well, he might give her a new name. Kilia, Amazonia, Bologna, not the name of a slave. The name of a warrior. Like male gladiators, women trained in specialized styles, threx, curved blade, crested helmet, murmillo, sword, and tower shield. Retiarius, net and trident. Demacherus, 2 swords. She learned footwork, counterattacks, fake-outs, how to bleed just enough to excite the crowd, but not die. But she also trained in performance eye contact. Battle cries, ritual salutes, how to fall and how to rise again. The arena was not war, it was theater, and she had to become a character. Were there many women in one Ludus? We don't know. But evidence suggests that female gladiators were trained separately, likely in smaller groups or isolated. In some schools, they were forbidden contact with men. In others, they were prostituted for the pleasure of elite guests. Some women formed sisterhoods, bonds of survival. Others saw each other as rivals, fighting for rare chances to perform. They braided each other's hair before matches, shared stolen fruit, hid bruises from the lanista, whispered stories of freedom or death. For female gladiators, the line between violence and sex was thin and often crossed. They were eroticized, fetishized, objectified. Their armor might expose their breasts. Their tunics were often short. Some fought naked, a deliberate mockery of male modesty. Elite Roman men paid fortunes to attend private shows. Some hired female gladiators as personal bodyguards, both dangerous and decorative. The Roman elite loved the paradox. A woman who fought like a man and yet remained a spectacle for men. Injuries were constant. Broken noses, dislocated shoulders, deep gashes, concussions. Many gladiators bore permanent scars, some trained with one eye, some with one hand less than they began. There were doctors, medici gladiatori specialized in treating combat wounds. They stitched, they bled, they cauterized, but there was no real healing, only rebuilding. Every scar was a tattoo of survival. A few gladiators earned enough to buy freedom. Some were granted it for exceptional bravery. They received a rudis, a wooden sword symbolizing release. But for a female gladiator, freedom was not simple. Even free, she would be, disgraced, unmarriageable, marked forever by her past. Some left the Ludus, some returned, some opened schools of their own. Most vanished. But for those still training inside the walls, the dream of one fight, one victory, one chance, kept them alive, and then it was time. The night before her first match, she slept little, not from fear, but from anticipation. She oiled her arms, braided her hair, tied her wrist guards tight. At dawn, she would walk through the gate of life and face the arena. The crowd would see her not as a woman, not as a slave, but as a gladiator. And in that moment, she would belong to no one. Not Rome, not the lanista, not even death, just the blade, the sand, the roar. Next, she enters the arena. The rules are different now. So are the expectations. In the next chapter, we walk with her into the eye of the storm and witness what it meant to fight and perform. As a gladiatrix, the sand is warm beneath her feet. The sun, a silent god overhead. The crowd leans forward. She hears nothing, and everything, every heartbeat, every breath, every whisper of wind on her skin. This is it. No more training. No more drills. Only the arena. Only the moment. This is where the Gladiatrix becomes legend, or dust. Every fight began with a ritual. Trumpets blared. Drummers pounded out the heartbeat of death. The gladiators marched in procession, side by side, their armor catching the sun. Women, too, followed this path. Whether part of the main games or evening spectacles, they saluted the crowd and the emperor. Avenue Caesar, morituri te salutin. Hail Caesar, we who are about to die salute you. Some crowds booed them, others were silent. But some roared, not in derision, but awe. They had never seen such a thing. A woman, armed, unbowed, a contradiction in sandals. Female gladiators didn't always fight men, though records suggest they sometimes did. They were often paired against each other. Threx versus Threx, Murmillo versus Hoplomachus, Retiarius versus Dimicara. These weren't mock fights. They were brutal, bloody, and real. Sometimes to the death, sometimes to submission, and always choreographed to thrill the crowd. Other times, women were pitted against animals. Boars, wolves, even lions. These were humiliating punishments, but also exotic displays, playing into Roman desires for the unthinkable. The gate swings shut behind her. The roar becomes a wall of sound. Her opponent steps forward, Also a woman, also armored. Also trembling, but hiding it. The referee lifts his hand. The crowd quiets. Then, the clash. Steel scrapes steel. Swords flash in arcs. Dust kicks up around their feet. It is not wild. It is not sloppy. It is precise. Trained, practiced, deadly. She takes a hit to the shoulder, stumbles, recovers. The crowd shouts, cheers. Someone throws a coin. Another a curse. Blood streaks her thigh. She presses forward. This is not just survival. This is performance. Good Gladiatrix knew how to perform. She didn't just fight. She acted, feigning weakness, then striking fast, drawing out the struggle for drama, making eye contact with the audience, showing pain without begging. The arena was part stage, part slaughterhouse. The more dramatic the match, the greater the reward, and the chance of mercy if defeated. To the Roman elite, female gladiators were more than warriors. They were taboo made flesh, fighting half naked, glistening with sweat, armor clinging to curves. They embodied Roman obsession with dominance, inversion, and desire. Satirists accused them of fighting to attract lovers. Senators secretly sponsored them. Emperors watched from private boxes. The eroticism was never separate from the violence. In the Colosseum, sex and death walked hand in hand. The Gladiatrix was a fetish and a threat. A weaponized woman who could kill you or seduce you. Or both. No matter how brave, every match had an end. If a Gladiatrix fell, she was expected to kneel, to raise a finger, the ad digitum, signaling surrender. The referee turned to the crowd, then to the editor, the sponsor of the games. They would decide mit, spare her, jugula, kill her. Sometimes the crowd cried for mercy. Other times, they demanded death, a thumbs up, thumbs down. That was a myth. The signal may have been a closed fist or a horizontal thumb. A gesture lost to time. Spared, she lived to fight another day. If not, a swift thrust to the throat. Death in silence. The body, whether male or female, was dragged out by Quran figures dressed as death. A hot iron was applied to ensure death. The sand was raked. The next fight prepared. For those who survived, there was no rest. She might be patched up, given water, tended to by medics. Then, back to the barracks. Back to the silence. But sometimes, there were rewards. A few female gladiators became celebrities. Their names were painted on walls, or images carved on cups and oil lamps. They were given gifts, freedom, even lovers. Men and women wrote poems about them. Some imitated their hairstyles. Some requested their company for banquets or bedrooms. For a moment, they had power. The kind Roman women weren't supposed to have. Power from pain, power from fear, power from spectacle. But it never lasted. Under Domitian and Nero, female matches became fashions of excess. Torchlight duels at night, combat in flooded arenas. Exhibitions where women fought dwarves or men in masks. Each event more grotesque, more unthinkable than the last. To Rome, these women were not just fighters. They were the decay of order, the fantasy of inversion, the edge of the empire's morality, and the crowd couldn't look away. Few female gladiators had long careers. Their bodies broke, their minds frayed. Their luck ran dry. Some died in the arena, others from infection. A few, a very few, were freed. And then silence. No records, no tombs, no eulogies. Just fragments. But in the roar of the arena, for one moment, she had the power of gods. She was seen. She was feared. She was immortal. In the next chapter, we go deeper, not into battle, but into meaning. Why did Rome fear her? Why did emperors try to ban her? Why was she so dangerous? Even when defeated, we step into the shadows of the arena and confront the moral panic she left behind. Next, spectacle and scandal. Why Rome feared female fighters. She stood in the arena, armor gleaming, sword raised. The crowd gasped. The emperor leaned forward. The philosopher recoiled. The priest turned away. She was not just a fighter, she was a scandal. Why? Because in a world obsessed with order, she was a living act of defiance. Rome didn't just fear female gladiators because they were dangerous. Rome feared them because they exposed something deeper, something Rome wanted hidden. This is the chapter where we confront that fear. To understand Rome's panic, you must understand its gender architecture. Rome was built on a binary world: male, public, rational, disciplined, dominant female, private, emotional, passive. Subordinate to break this structure was to invite chaos. A woman in armor? She was not just fighting another body. She was fighting the hierarchy. To cheer for her was to cheer for inversion. And Rome could not allow inversion to become admiration. In Roman culture, the female body symbolized family purity, ancestral lineage, domestic virtue. It was a body made for marriage, motherhood, and mourning. To take that body and strap it in leather, hand it a blade, display it for a crowd, was to turn it into a symbol of disorder. She became a paradox, erotic and violent, beautiful and brutal, desired and condemned. Rome could not categorize her, and Rome hated what it could not categorize. Juvenile's satire VI is infamous. He mocks noble women who trained as gladiators. He sneers at their sweat, their weapons, their calloused hands. When she gets home, she needs a long bath to wash off the arena, but beneath the laughter lies fear. Juvenile wasn't just making jokes, he was signaling that the social order was cracking. A woman with a sword meant a man had lost control, and in Roman patriarchy, control was everything. Ironically, the very men who condemned gladiatrices also indulged in them. Private duels were held in gardens, torchlit matches in emperors' courtyards. Wealthy senators paid fortunes for female fighters to appear at banquets. They wanted the thrill, but not the consequences. They wanted the inversion, but not in public. So they kept her secret, and when necessary, destroyed her memory. The rising popularity of female combatants sparked waves of moral panic. By the 2nd century CE, the backlash began. Emperor Septimius Severus issued a ban on women in the arena. The law was clear. No female citizen may perform in gladiatorial games. Why? Because these performances were seen as indecent, unnatural, even un-Roman. But the law didn't just reflect disgust, it reflected fear. Fear that women would abandon modesty, men would lose dominance, Rome would lose its identity. In the arena, every element was symbolic. The sword, power; the sand, purification; the blood, sacrifice; the emperor's thumb, divine judgment. Introducing a woman into this ritual disrupted the signal. She was not supposed to have power, not supposed to perform, not supposed to survive, and yet she did, which meant the ritual failed, or worse, evolved. Gladiatrices were usually poor, foreigners, slaves, but some were noblewomen, training for sport, or thrill, or defiance. This blurred the lines between class, gender, and power. If a rich Roman woman could fight in the arena, what else could she do? Speak in court, command soldiers, rule? To the Senate, this wasn't entertainment, it was an omen. The same anxiety that haunted Rome in its declining years. Barbarians at the gate, currency devalued, emperors murdered, was reflected in the body of the Gladiatrix. She was the collapse made flesh, and so she was erased. Her names were chiseled out, her records omitted, her tombstones left anonymous. But the silence speaks volumes. Because a culture only hides what it fears. And Rome feared her, not because she killed, but because she showed that the Roman order was not eternal, that a woman could wear a helmet, draw blood, command a crowd, and be cheered, not shamed. They outlawed her, they mocked her, they silenced her, but they could not unwrite her, because every time a stylist scratched her name, every time a poet whispered about Amazonia, every time a girl watched from the stands and dreamed, the Gladiatrix lived on. The Gladiatrix was not just a spectacle, she was a rupture, a crack in the stone facade of empire, a glimpse into a world Rome feared but could not stop, and so she became legend. Not by surviving, but by being too powerful to forget. In the next chapter, we dive into their biographies. Who were these women? What were their names, origins, motives, from slaves to stars? Chapter 7 uncovers the real lives behind the swords. History remembers few names. even fewer faces, and almost no women. But behind every helmet, every sword, every whispered scandal, there was a person. Not a myth, not a metaphor. A woman. Who was she? What brought her to the arena? What did she leave behind? What did she gain? In this chapter, we peel back the steel and dust to reveal the women beneath. Gladiators came from two main streams. Forced combatants, enslaved, condemned, or punished. Volunteers, free citizens who signed contracts to fight, so did women. For the Gladiatrix, the line was blurrier and more loaded. Many were slaves, captured in war, born into servitude, sold by families, condemned by courts. Some were punishment fighters, women of the elite convicted of adultery, treason, or scandal, forced to fight not just as execution, but as humiliation. Others, far fewer, were octorated. Free women who chose to enter the arena. Why would they? For money, for thrill, for notoriety, or simply for agency. In a world that offered women few choices, this was one, a dangerous one, but their own. Rome's empire stretched across 3 continents, and with every conquest came a flood of captives. Women from Gaul, Germania, Britannia, Dacia, Numidia, Judea. They were dragged to Rome, sold at auction, marked, stripped, assigned. Some were bought by lanista, gladiator school owners. Others were funneled into the Ludus Matatinus, where women and exotic combatants were trained. We do not know their names, but we know the patterns. They were foreign. Other displayed as exotic trophies of conquest. When they entered the arena, they weren't just fighters. They were reminders of Roman victory and Roman cruelty. The Roman elite believed deeply in honor and in public disgrace. For women of high rank who fell afoul of imperial power, the arena became a weapon of shame. Juvenal hints at senators' wives training with wooden swords. Suetonius describes female nobility performing in private games. These women weren't slaves, but they were no longer citizens. They were being erased by being forced to become spectacle. In this way, the arena served dual purpose. A stage for Roman might a punishment for Roman disobedience, especially when it came from women. Their names were removed from records, but their stories linger in the edges of satire and imperial gossip. And then, there were the volunteers, rare, controversial, impossible to ignore. These were women who had no dowry, had no husband, had debts, had nothing to lose, but some were thrill-seekers, fascinated by the games, drawn to the glory. Like their male counterparts, they signed contracts. I name, of my own will, agree to surrender my body to the Ludus. They gave up legal protections. They entered servitude. They trained, they fought, and for some, it worked. They gained fame, coins, freedom. Their names appeared on frescoes. Their likenesses were carved in relief. They became arena stars. We do not know if Amazonia and Aquileia were volunteers or slaves, but we know they earned missio, release from combat. That suggests respect. No single answer fits them all. But imagine, a slave, condemned to death, choosing the arena to earn a slim chance at freedom. A poor girl, sold by her parents, trained for blood instead of marriage. A widow, shamed, volunteering to fight for money. A rebellious noblewoman, humiliated publicly as penance. Fearless outsider, drawn by fame, battle, and the hunger to matter. Each came with her own reason. Each stepped into the arena not as a symbol, but as a self. A woman saying, I will not be invisible. We don't have full biographies, but we can reconstruct portraits through fragments. Amazonia, named after the mythical race of warrior women. She fought in Halicarnassus, learned to draw. Her name carved in stone, a Greek, a slave, a performer. She likely trained for months, fought for minutes, survived. A name etched for eternity. Aquileia fought against Amazonia. Her name invokes Achilles, the perfect warrior, a woman with the name of a man who defied death. The relief shows her helmeted, shield raised, mid-strike. Not erotic, not diminished, honored. Unknown Gladiatrix in Ostia, an inscription, partly destroyed, names a woman who fought in the games. No date, no image. Only the word Gladiatrix survives. She fought, and someone thought it worth carving into stone. The ghosts women whose names are lost, but whose presence is felt in bans issued by emperors, satirical verses, arena rosters with feminine names scratched out, fragments of armor, jewelry, and graffiti. They were many, not thousands, but not just 2 or 3. Enough to spark fascination, enough to spark fear. Some of these women became famous. Crowds chanted their names. Artists sketched them. Merchants sold figurines bearing their likenesses. They were admired by the poor, mocked by the elite, desired by the powerful. Their names became fashionable aliases in taverns and bathhouses. I want a girl like Achilles. She fights like Amazonia. Their fame burned fast. But it burned hot. Some died in the arena. Others of disease or childbirth. Few earned freedom, awarded a wooden sword and released. But free life was hard. A woman who had fought publicly was often shunned, unmarriageable, unfit for temple service. Mocked, some found patrons, others faded. But a few may have trained the next generation, opened schools, or worked in Ludi as instructors. Their traces are faint, but they existed, and they left ripples. The Gladiatrices challenge everything we think we know about Rome, that it was a world of male dominance, that women were passive, that rebellion could never be glamorous. They show us that even in the darkest, most violent systems, some people found a voice, a weapon, a spotlight. They were not saints, not rebels, not symbols. They were women who chose or were forced to fight. And in doing so, they became legends. In the next chapter, we leave history behind for a moment. We reconstruct a single life, a story, rooted in fact, colored by evidence, that brings us as close as we can come to walking in a Gladiatrix's sandals. Next, a day in the life of a Gladiatrix reconstructed biography. Her name is Valabria. She is 24 years old. Born in Dacia, captured during Rome's northern campaigns, sold into slavery at 14, trained in Ludus Mautinas, Rome's Eastern School for exotic fighters. She is about to fight for the 4th time. This is not myth. This is not fantasy. This is her day. The sound of the iron bell shakes her awake. She sleeps in a narrow stone cell. No window. A straw mat. 1 copper ring drilled into the wall. She stretches her arms, worn and knotted with muscle. Her ribs ache from yesterday's drills. Today is fight day, but there is no fear. There is ritual. She washes from a bucket, braids her hair, wraps her hands in leather, touches the wooden training sword on the wall, a charm more than a tool. The door opens. The trainer shouts. It begins. Breakfast is barley mash, dry figs, and watered vinegar. Posca, other gladiators sit around her, mostly men, a few women. It's eyes down, no talking today. There is tension. Some are new, some veterans, some doomed. She watches them as they eat. They watch her too. Not with lust, not with scorn, but with something else. She's survived 3 matches. She killed a Mermello with a single cut. She's earned something strange here. Not respect, but fear. Her gear is laid out by a slave, greaves of bronze, Thracian-style curved blade, small shield, helmet crestless, thin leather tunic that ends mid-thigh. She hates the tunic. Not because it's revealing, but because it's meant to remind the crowd she is a woman. She fastens it anyway. She dresses, she whispers a prayer. To Nemesis. To Bologna. To the ancestors I've never met. She's not religious, but she's superstitious. She paces. This is the waiting cell beneath the Colosseum. Above her dust, footsteps, the growing hum of a crowd. She hears the Ludi Magister give orders. A Retiarius is going up, a condemned criminal after that then. She rolls her shoulders. Checks the grip of her sword, tries to breathe evenly. She has done this before, but the crowd is always different. In death. Always closer. The gate opens. She steps forward into a wall of light, dust, and noise. 50,000 people watch her. Some cheer, some jeer, some are stunned into silence. Her opponent stands across from her. Another woman, taller, Rechiarius style, net and trident. A rare pairing. The referee raises a hand. Belabria steps into the sand slowly, shoulder turned, blade low, eyes focused. The match begins. The net comes first. Wide whipping. She ducks left. Blade up. Slides. The trident jabs. She parries. Spins. They circle. The crowd roars. Blood is drawn. Shallow her forearm. She grits her teeth. Another pass. She slashes, catching the woman's thigh. The Rechiarius limps, net dragging behind her. Belabria moves in. The trident comes fast, aimed at her chest. She dives, rolls, strikes. It lands. The woman falls. A heartbeat passes. The referee approaches. The crowd begins to shout. Some chant mid, spare her. Others Ugula, kill. Belabria steps back, breathing hard. Blood on her lip, she waits. The editor stands. A gesture mercy. The fight is over. She is led out, limping, a deep bruise on her thigh. Her shoulder aches. She's treated by a gladiator medicus, an ex-legion doctor with steady hands and no patience. He stitches her arm, wraps her ribs, says nothing. She eats again, beans and dates this time. Washes with cold water, stares at the cut on her leg. Little scar, but that's fine. Scars are status. Scars mean you've been seen. Back in her cell, she lies awake. Above her, Rome sleeps, drinks, or laughs, or plots. She remembers her brother's scream when he was taken. Her first match, the moment a child in the crowd shouted her name. She smiles, just barely. She is not free, but she is not forgotten. It's Belabria. Will fight twice more. Her 7th match will be her last. No inscription will mark her death. No poet will remember her name. But her face will be drawn. Once, on a tavern wall. A figure with a curved blade and a scarred cheek. Labeled only the Dacian. She will become story, then rumor, then nothing. But for one day. She lived like a thunderclap in marble silence. In the next chapter, we return to the wider world. From myth to misunderstanding, from fantasy to film, we trace the afterlife of the Gladiatrix. How she was forgotten. How she was twisted. How she returned. Next, myth, fantasy, and misrepresentation. The Gladiatrix in popular imagination. She stood in the arena, and then she disappeared. For nearly 2,000 years, the Gladiatrix vanished from public history. No more names, no more records, no more statues. Just a few broken inscriptions, a relief in a museum, a whisper in a satire. And then, slowly, she returned. But the woman who came back was not the one who had fought in Rome. She had been rewritten, remade, often as fantasy, sometimes as farce, occasionally as truth. This is the story of how the Gladiatrix survived, in the margins, in the myths, and in our imaginations. In the medieval Christian world, the arena was remembered as a den of pagan vice. Gladiators were condemned or canonized, depending on how they died. But female gladiators? They were erased entirely. The idea of a woman fighting publicly, semi-nude, for coin and spectacle, was morally unthinkable. Writers of the time saw her not as historical curiosity, but as blasphemy. So the Gladiatrix was buried in silence, not by accident, but by design. The Renaissance rediscovered ancient Rome, but it focused on statues of Caesar, poetry of Virgil, busts of Cicero, not forgotten female fighters. Still, a few strange images appear. Engravings of armored women on horseback, sword raised, paintings depicting female duels, reinterpretations of Amazons, often standing in for the idea of the Gladiatrix. These women weren't labeled Gladiatrices, but the archetype began to seep back into art, through myth, through fiction, through visual fantasy. The Age of Empires brought with it a romantic obsession with ancient Rome. Victorian painters and neoclassical sculptors reimagined the Colosseum not as a place of horror, but of heroism. And in some canvases, women returned to the sand, not as real people, but as fantasies. Beautiful, bare-skinned, draped in impractical armor, locked in slow-motion duels, often bleeding, erotically. Pain became titillation. The Gladiatrix became a fetish. Still, beneath the fiction, one truth lingered. Rome had female fighters, but we only remember them when they entertain us. The early 20th century brought silent films and sword and sandal epics. From Cabiria to Quo Vadis, the gladiator was reborn on screen. And occasionally, in a flash, a female combatant appeared, never a star. Never accurate, but always present enough to raise eyebrows. In 1960s pulp cinema, peplum films made in Italy, the Gladiatrix exploded in popularity. Gladiator Women of Rome, The Amazons, Hercules vs. the Gladiator Women. These films were campy, exaggerated, exploitative, but they also kept the concept alive. Sometimes trash keeps history breathing. In the 1970s and 80s, comics and fantasy novels turned the Gladiatrix into a warrior queen archetype. Characters like Red Sonja, Shauna the Sheetovel, Vampirella, in Roman armor. She was always beautiful, deadly, half-naked, and rarely, if ever, grounded in historical truth. But the fantasy had appeal, and beneath the stylized violence there was a seed, a desire to see women wield power, in arenas designed to deny them, even in distortion. Something real remained. The 21st century brought more nuanced attempts to reclaim the Gladiatrix. In Spartacus, Blood and Sand, the character Lacinia trains with gladiators. In Rome, elite Roman women flirt with combat. In documentaries like Ancient Warriors in Colosseum, the Gladiatrix is treated with more respect. Archaeologists discuss the Halicarnassus relief, inscriptions from Ostia, the Severan band. But fiction still shapes public memory, even when she's portrayed accurately. She's framed by modern eyes. We give her strength, but also modern motives. We forget that real gladiatrices were often terrified, coerced, or erased. In online spaces, the Gladiatrix thrives. Cosplayers dress as armored women from history and myth. Fan artists reinterpret Amazonia in manga and video game aesthetics. TikTok and YouTube creators dramatize her story in shorts, animations, memes. She's a symbol of resistance, a feminist icon, fantasy avatar, a meme. She is many things now, some truthful, some twisted, but never invisible. For the first time in 2,000 years, the Gladiatrix is being written by women, and that changes everything. In recent decades, scholars like Alison Futrell, Shelley Haley, Kathleen Coleman have examined gladiatrices through archaeology, epigraphy, and gender theory. They separate myth from evidence. What was staged? What was real? What was satire? What was suppressed, they agree. Female gladiators existed, rare but real. Marginal but powerful. Their study is ongoing. From bone analysis to linguistic tracing, new discoveries are emerging. The Gladiatrix is no longer a curiosity. She's a subject. There's a danger in resurrection. We project onto her. We see what we want to see. A feminist rebel, a tragic victim, dominatrix, a superhero, a monster. But she was none of these. Perhaps all of them. She was a woman in a system not made for her, trying to survive. And that story, without armor, without fantasy, is powerful enough. She is not a punchline, not a costume, not just a shadow in soft-focus fantasy. She fought, she bled, she lived. And whether she wore iron or linen, whether she was feared or cheered, she mattered. We return to the heart of the story, the meaning of the Gladiatrix for our world, what she left behind, and what she teaches us now. Final chapter next. Legacy. Why Gladiatrices matter today. She should have been forgotten. That was the plan. Erase the records, shatter the stones, mock the memory, let the sand bury her. But something endured. A name scratched in stone, a carving on a broken relief, a rumor and a satire. It's a legend in the shadows. And now, after 2,000 years, we remember her. The Gladiatrix, not a myth, not a metaphor, but a woman who stood and fought. To matter in history, you must be recorded. To be recorded, you must be visible. To be visible, you must fit the system's values. The Gladiatrix did none of these. She fought but wasn't a soldier. She performed but wasn't an actor. She bled but wasn't a man. So Rome made her invisible. Her memory became taboo. Her name became ash. And yet we are here, talking about her, telling her story. Because even erased women leave outlines. And when we trace those outlines, they speak louder than monuments. The Gladiatrix never marched in protest, never wrote a manifesto, never claimed liberation. But her very existence was an act of rebellion. In the most public, patriarchal space in Rome, she fought. Under the eyes of emperors, priests, poets, and generals, she lived. That matters. She didn't need to overthrow the empire. She just needed to survive in its center. And in doing so, she created a crack in the facade. History is often told through kings and emperors, battles and treaties, statues and speeches. But beneath every stone palace, there are bones that never got names. The Gladiatrix reminds us, sometimes the most powerful stories are the ones that were never meant to survive. She forces us to look down, not up, to study the erased, to listen to the silenced. Today, the Gladiatrix has become more than a figure of curiosity. She has become a symbol of women in combat, a mirror for those whose stories are suppressed, a question posed to power. Who do you allow to be remembered? She has been reclaimed by feminist scholars, historical fiction writers, artists, and cosplayers. Fighters, rebels, thinkers, each sees something in her. Struggle, dignity, rage, beauty, agency. She doesn't belong to history alone. She belongs to now. But the Gladiatrix also reminds us of the limits of power. Rome was a civilization obsessed with control. It controlled land, it controlled religion, controlled bodies. But it couldn't control memory, even after banning her, mocking her, erasing her. The idea of the Gladiatrix persisted, and today she walks again. Through fiction, through scholarship, through screen and sculpture, Rome could command the present. But it couldn't own the future. Her legacy is carved into the body itself. Her muscles, her scars, her breath. The body is resistance. The body is story. The body is survival. She turned herself into a weapon, not to conquer, but to be unignorable. And in doing so, she turned the arena from a prison into a stage. The Gladiatrix rarely won in the end. Most died young. Few were freed. None became queens. But legacy isn't always built on victory. Sometimes it's built on endurance, defiance, the refusal to be erased. That's what she left us. Not a banner, not a crown, but a question. What do you do when the world says you don't belong? She answered with a blade. We live in a world still wrestling with who gets the spotlight, who is remembered, who is allowed to fight. From women in the military to marginalized voices in history books, the Gladiatrix echoes in every woman who breaks a rule, takes up space, refuses to be silent. She fought for her life. Today others fight for their voices. Her legacy is not just about combat, it's about presence. Today museums feature her image. Documentaries tell her story. Students write her name. She is being studied, rewritten. Not as fantasy, but as fact. She will never again be entirely lost, because now we know to look for her. Not in the obvious places, but in the margins, in the shards, in the lines crossed out. She doesn't shout, she doesn't plead. She waits. And when we're ready, she returns. She was a daughter, a prisoner, a fighter, a spectacle, scarred memory, a flash of defiance on the edge of a sword. She didn't ask to be remembered, but we remember her anyway. And that, in a world built to forget her, is her greatest victory. She was real, and she mattered.